The ongoing Iran-Iraq war produced its latest and arguably worst atrocity as the Iraqi government deployed chemical weapons against the Kurdish town of Halabja. Local Kurdish rebels, the Peshmerga, had risen in support of an Iranian offensive in the area, but when that was beaten back, Saddam's forces enacted a brutal revenge, bombing the town with a mixture of mustard gas and nerve agents and killing around 5,000 people in what remains the largest known deployment of chemical weapons against a populated area in history. On the same day in Northern Ireland, the funeral took place in Belfast of 3 provisional IRA members shot dead by the SAS in Gibraltar. In an effort to de-escalate tensions, neither armed IRA members nor police would be at the service. A member of the loyalist paramilitary group, the Ulster Defence Association, also attended the funeral, with grenades and pistols, killing 3 and injuring 60 before he was chased off by the crowd, finally rescued by the police from being beaten to death by them. 3 days later, 2 off-duty and out-of-uniform British Army corporals driving a civilian car through Belfast encountered the funeral procession of one of the victims of the cemetery attack. Accounts vary as to exactly what happened next and why, but the car appeared to be driving straight towards the procession despite attempts to warn them off, tried to turn at the last minute, then reversed into the procession itself. The mourners, fearing another attack by loyalists, dragged the soldiers from the car and began to beat them. The soldiers were armed and tried defending themselves, but revealing themselves as British soldiers didn't help their case, and they were dragged to a nearby park and executed. And in the US, on the same day as the Halabja and cemetery attacks, the ongoing investigations into the Iran-Contra affair formally indicted Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North and Vice Admiral John Poindexter on charges of conspiracy to defraud the United States. Later that week, the first McDonald's to open in a communist country opened in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, while in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, the so-called candle demonstration was organised by Catholic dissidents, protesting for religious freedom. 5,000 Slovaks made it to Hviezdoslav Square just before the secret police closed off the access routes, with another 6,000 gathering in neighbouring streets. The demonstrators were dispersed with water cannons and baton charges, much to the dismay of the Minister of Culture, who resigned later that year in protest. The 25th of March is now observed as Struggle for Human Rights Day in Slovakia. Meanwhile, in the world of F1, things were just as frantic, if rather less deadly for the most part, as the teams headed for Brazil and the opening Grand Prix of what many were billing as the most open Formula One season in years. As was often the case, several teams were still working on their cars for the current season and would take to the track an updated 1987 chassis, or in the case of the new Scuderia Italia team, a modified Formula 3000 Dallara chassis. They would be competing at the newly renamed Autodromo Nelson Piquet, though home support was a little thinner than usual thanks to a severe recession going on in Brazil at the time, and the race taking place on Easter Sunday in a fiercely Catholic country probably didn't help either. Pre-season tests at Rio suggested that Ferrari had the best car, with McLaren and Williams also looking good, but Ferrari's times had been so good, better than in 1987 in some cases, that many suspected that they were still running the 4-bar boost. The truth would soon be revealed, but first there was pre-qualifying to reduce 31 entries to the regulation 30 for qualifying proper. The 4 new teams, Coloni, Eurobrunn, Real and Scuderia Italia, had their first of many early mornings, with Caffi in the F3000 Dallara being the unsurprising casualty, and then the big boys could come out to play. It was immediately obvious that Ferrari had been flattering in the off-season, as it was the McLarens that were setting the pace here, with Senna ending up crashing Piquet's party by putting his McLaren on pole at the first time of asking. Prost was third, but between the two was Nigel Mansell, who'd surprised many with a heroic effort to place his normally aspirated Williams Judd second, his 16th successive front-row start if you don't count the races he missed at the end of 1987. Berger's Ferrari was fourth, nearly a second behind Senna, with Piquet beginning his title defence from fifth, a full second behind Berger. Alboreto was sixth, Boutsen and Patrese on row 4, and then Ivan Capelli turning a lot of heads in the eye-catching March, another positive mark for that new Judd engine. Nakajima rounded out the top 10, Nannini was 12th in the other Benetton, Gugelmin 13th on his debut in the second March, and De Cesaris a very creditable 14th in the new Real. Of the other debutants, Salah was 20th and 3/10 ahead of his teammate. The Eurobruns both qualified, Modena 24th and Lorari 26th, and the 4 to join Caffi on the sidelines would be Julian Bailey, Nicola Larini and both Zach speeds, with Schneider some 10.5 seconds off Senna's pole time. So the 26 drivers lined up on the grid to start the season. It had rained on and off over the weekend, and many were expecting the race to be affected by the weather, but as they all came round to finish the parade lap, Senna started waving his arms in the cockpit. His car was stuck in first gear, while further back Capelli's March was also not feeling very well, and Oscar Larrauri had stalled out on the track and was being pushed in. So the year began with an aborted start as Senna, Capelli and Larrauri got in their spare cars to start from the pit lane, leaving Mansell in effective pole position. And just to add to Senna's woes, the spare McLaren was set up for Prost, not a situation the Brazilian was accustomed to. Once they were all ready to go once more, the lights went green and the season could finally get underway, as Mansell leaped off the grid, but Prost was quicker and took the lead going into turn 1, with Berger slotting in behind Mansell, then Piquet and the Benettons, while Gugelmin's home debut had been very short, as his march only went about 50 yards before his gearbox broke and he pulled over, nearly taking off his own roommate Senna, coming thundering out of the pit lane in the process. Berger outdragged Mansell into second down the back straight, so at the end of lap 1 it was McLaren, Ferrari, Williams, Lotus, Benetton in the top 5, though Alboreto soon displaced Boutsen into 5th place. The leaders were spreading out already, with Prost leading Berger by just over 2 seconds at the end of lap 2, and Berger 2.5 ahead of Mansell, who in turn had 1.5 on Piquet. So attention turned to Alboreto in his attempt to keep the nimbler Benettons behind him in the twisty bit, so he could use his superior power on the long straights. He certainly seemed to be holding them up, and Boutsen was beginning to get a bit frustrated trying to get past. Meanwhile, further back, Senna was putting on an impressive charge. Having started at the back, he was already up to 13th by lap 8, when Capelli and Patrese had almost synchronised Judd engine failures. Shortly after that, Boutsen finally got past Alboreto, and Senna glided past Nakajima into 8th on lap 10. Even the Piquet faithful had to admit it was quite something. Meanwhile, Boutsen was up behind Piquet as Senna disposed of Warwick and then a fading Alboreto, and then off-screen past Nannini. Soon he was bearing down on the Boutsen-Piquet scrap over 4th place. All this time, meanwhile, Prost was still tearing away in the lead, stretching his lead over Berger by a second a lap. For all Boutsen's impressive driving, he was barely a speed bump to Senna as the McLaren passed both him and Tarquini's Coloni in one go, so now there was nobody between Senna and his great rival Piquet, who had made controversial comments in the Brazilian press over the winter impugning Senna's masculinity as if it wasn't already a personal enough rivalry. Alboreto pitted for new tyres on lap 15, with Prost now already a whopping 18.5 seconds ahead of Berger, who had Mansell right behind, as Piquet proved unable to do anything to stop Senna, just cruising past to take 4th place and set off in pursuit of the podium. A couple of laps later, Mansell pulled in to make a tyre stop, but he was suffering from overheating and stalled his engine, which then refused to restart as the team hosed water into his radiators. For all Mansell's frantic gesticulations, his race was over. So Senna was up to 3rd, which became 2nd after Berger pitted for new tyres about 1/3 distance, on schedule for a 2-stop race. The number 12 McLaren was now bearing down on Prost in the lead, albeit still over 30 seconds back, keen on adding his name to the trophy that had been monopolised by Prost and Piquet since 1982. Behind the leading 3 by lap 24, Boutsen was 4th, Warwick 5th in the Arrows, and De Cesaris up to 6th in the brand new Real, not bad going for its debut. 2 laps later, Prost peeled in for his stop, the McLaren team gambling on a one-stop strategy with the reduction in tyre wear from the lower boost. He had plenty of time to get in and out in the lead, even with a sticking left front. 2 laps later, Senna came in himself. If he could do better, he could steal a march on his teammate, but something went wrong. The engine died, and he lost a lot of time while it was restarted and sent out again, rejoining 6th, with it all to do all over again. So Berger was back up to 2nd, with a deficit of just under 12 seconds, but would need to stop once more. Senna's day went from bad to worse a couple of laps after his stop when the black flags came out with his number on the board. The stewards had finally decided to disqualify him for swapping to the spare car after the green flag had been shown at the end of the race. There would no doubt be controversy about it after the race, but whatever the result, Senna had been disqualified for the 2nd event running. Piquet was the beneficiary of Senna's misfortune, running a lonely race in 3rd, but presumably now with a big grin on his face under the helmet. He was some distance behind Berger, who in turn was now 20 seconds behind Prost. Alboreto had made his way up to 5th before his own second stop, and things seemed to have stagnated a little as Prost started the 2/3 distance lap. Berger came in for his second stop a lap or so later. It was a good one, and he retained second place, but now he had even more to do to catch Prost. Berger got his foot down and set a series of fastest laps, but he had a 35-second gap to make up in 17 laps, so it was always going to be a tall order. Behind him, Piquet had dropped to 5th when he stopped, and was now behind Warwick's Arrows and Bootson's Benetton, which he overtook both together to regain 3rd place, with Warwick taking advantage to also get past Thierry, who seemed to be fading, as Alboreto passed him on lap 48. Berger, still charging, had got the gap down to 18 seconds with 11 laps to go, but Prost seemed unruffled in the lead despite the lap records tumbling behind him. In fact, he seemed possibly to be a bit too unruffled, easing off the pace so much that Berger was starting to scent an unlikely win, now just 10 seconds behind with 8 laps to go. In fact, Alain was worried about his fuel consumption, was easing off as much as he could to ensure a finish. The question was whether he'd run dry, get caught by Berger, or hang on for the win. The Austrian lapped Boutsen in the closing stages as Prost risked putting his foot down a bit and stabilised the gap. And that was it. Prost took a dominant lights-to-flag win, pulling over just over the line with minimum fuel, as did several other drivers. Berger took a fighting 2nd and Piquet a rather anonymous 3rd. Warwick took a solid 4th for Arrows, and Alboreto was 5th, with Nakajima pipping Boutsen for the last points, with just a couple of laps to go. There were just 3 more finishers, Boutsen and Cheever a lap behind the leaders, and then Johansson 3 laps back after having all sorts of suspension issues in the Ligier, but still the only Judd runner to make it to the end. The predictions of turbo dominance in Rio turned out to be accurate. Prost had set out to stall early, Piquet had looked a little anonymous in his new team but had had some moments, and Ferrari was still clearly strong. Lots to talk about then in the month before the next race at Imola on the 1st of May.